pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night, welcome to Soccer Today. It's March 2nd. It's one day before the season starts, and it's the 4th annual MLS Predictions Show, Duane.
It is indeed. It's hard to believe. It's the third. We're starting our third season of daily coverage, 5 times a week, and our fourth season overall. So this is pretty exciting times here, and I don't know. I'm so excited, and I just can't hide it, Kevin.
Yeah, the last month went by so quickly, and the Olympics and getting ready for the MLS season. And it's now upon us. Tomorrow it starts. Toronto, Columbus, tomorrow afternoon. And we'll talk about it today. And the way we will do our predictions today, we will go through the standings. And there's a list of questions that Duane prepared that we will give our predictions to. Example, who's going to be the Golden Boot, the MVP of a Canadian team? LAFC, is it more Minnesota or Atlanta? That's the type of questions and predictions Duane and I will answer today's show.
Exactly, and then we'll give our famous who's going to win the MLS Cup and who the finalist will be, and we're going to pick who the wooden spoon is going to be. Kevin might be nervous. I don't know. I'm not going to spoil it just yet. But
nervous? Can you give me a wooden knee instead? I will take the knee or a tendon right now. Like, it might be useful in Montreal.
There you go. All right. Well, shall we just jump in and start going through our standings off the top? We figured we'd go conference by conference in reverse order. Let's go bottom to top. Bottom to top. All right. So
okay. Let's start with the Western Conference. And let's start, because there's 12 teams, right? There's one more to go in the Western Conference than the Eastern Conference this year. So Let's start with your standings for the Western Conference. Number 12.
My number 12 team in the Western Conference, and this one's going to surprise a few people, I think. And it has something to do with one thing. Having stood and watched the deepest team in the history of world football last year, that was what Greg Vandy said, right?
Something like that? Sure, whatever.
Yeah, something like that. So having watched the depth and the importance of depth, I've decided to prioritize depth in my pick most of all, because it is so precarious when you're playing an MLS season that when you only have, say, 18 players to start a season, that's a problem. And I know that you might be able to bring some big names in the summer, and I know that the top 11 of this team looks pretty good, and I know they have a coach that looks pretty good, and I'm already answering a question we're going to talk about later. But my pick for 12th and last in the MLS Western Conference is LAFC. They only have 18 players in camp.
Yeah,
that's terrifying.
It is terrifying. It's still early, and you never know who you can sign late on. But I don't necessarily have LAFC as number 12, but I don't necessarily have them in the playoffs either. So I can understand where you have them. I'll mention them when it's time for my standings of LAFC. And my number 12 in the Western Conference is, when in doubt, you have to choose something that will look a bit like last year, and for me it's Minnesota. It was difficult in their first year. They were better than expected. Remember that 9-point prediction Duane made 1 year ago? It was a bit more than that, of course, but I feel Minnesota's going to have some trouble this year too. The lack of designated player, there was a great turnaround of players, so it's basically year 2, but it's basically year 1B for Minnesota, and we'll see how it unfolds. But for me, they'll be last in the Western Conference.
Yeah, look, and I mean, I can just jump into my next pick because I have them second last here, obviously, and you touched on it. They don't have any high-profile players. When we talked to Jeff last week, they've essentially cut the fat off this team, but there's not a lot there. Basically, they're going into a second expansion season in many ways, because the reason I picked them for 9 points last year, that was a bit of a hyperbole prediction for sure. But at that time, they were leaking goals like no one's business. They sort of fixed that, but then they bring in Sam Cronin, who was a great stabilizer for them last year. He's hurt and may not be back for quite a while this year. It's very difficult to see how they can possibly turn things around quickly. So, can they get a second chance at this? Maybe. They are lucky in the sense that they're going to have a second, essentially, when they open their new stadium next year. They're going to have sort of a second lease at a new start. They say you can only start falling. You can only have one first impression. I think in Minnesota's case, any team in MLS that launches outside of their main stadium and comes into a new stadium does have a chance to have a second first impression. And I think that that's probably Minnesota's focus at this point, is to have it right when they launch the stadium and get into what's going to be their permanent home. So feel sorry for those guys, because I like those guys, kind of relate to those guys. It's the northern thing, I think, maybe. But, it's not a good team, Kevin.
No, it's not. And speaking of Northern, and we'll continue, and mine is 11th, is north of California. It's Northern California, and 11th for me in the Western Conference. San Jose Earthquakes. Outside of the last few years, they have been a powerhouse from, 2012 to 2014. Remember that Goonies Never Say Die era, the Steven Lenhart, Chris Wondolowski, Alan Gordon era is long past, and now it's difficult times since they moved into Avaya Stadium, and I feel it's going to be continuing to be difficult. And this year, I see San Jose in 11th position in the Western Conference.
All right, well, I'll hold off on San Jose's talk until I get them in my order. I have them a little bit higher up my ranking here, but certainly I always say when I talk about the Earthquakes, whenever I'm doing, I don't have a computer in front of me and I'm trying to do a power rankings or something like that, and I'm writing all the teams down, and I'm like, what the hell is the team I'm forgetting? I always default to the...
Which one am I forgetting? Let me get this thing. Oh, yeah, the Quakes.
Yeah, it's always the Earthquakes. Although by saying that, they're now maybe more memorable. All right, so I'll move to, what's this? This
number
is
10.
Number 10 in the West. I have the Colorado Rapids
and we agree.
In the West. We agree.
Colorado number 10 in the West.
It really comes down to what we talked about a lot, because we talked about the Rapids more than most non-Canadian teams over the last week, simply because they were playing TFC in the Champions League, which is ironic. It's like when TFC used to play in the Champions League back when TFC was terrible football club. But nonetheless, the problem with them is that, first off, they made a ton of changes. And when we saw them in Toronto, the one thing that they did have going for them, which is why I'm not going to pick them for last, is that they did have a good work ethic. They were really getting stuck in. They sort of took the ethos of their coach and really were putting that to roll. They're battling for positions, though, too, so you have to factor that in. They just don't have a scorer. They just don't have anyone that can break open a game. And you don't have that in MLS 3.12850, whatever we're in now. You're not going to succeed. And this is going to be a real challenge for Colorado. They're going to have to win games 1-0. They're probably going to have to scrape every point they can. They're going to at some point have to deal with the Tim Howard situation. It is way too much money to be spending on a keeper that has, it's value add, right? Like the value over replacement player. If they had that stat in MLS, I think Tim Howard would be probably at the bottom of the league, right? He's not a bad keeper even now, but he's not a keeper to the point that you want to pay that. And is he really selling tickets there? I don't know. So the Rapids are who I have.
It's been 18 months now that I've been talking about this, how in the salary cap league, value of a player is not just dictated by the amount of money he's being paid. It's the amount of points versus dollars that he brings to the team when that is very high, and when you're he's not going to score goals, right? So you kind of have that aspect that it's hard to quantify his value and his contribution to the team. And in a salary cap league, you have to be able to quantify that contribution. Otherwise, like you mentioned, Zach McMath did pretty well on Wednesday.
Yeah, precisely. All right, since we both agree on that one, let's move to number 9. Trying to keep this thing moving fairly quick today. I am going to with a team that you've already talked about. That is the San Jose Earthquakes. This is not a playoff team. Just simply too much turnover. Stability is the most valuable commodity outside of allocation money, or TAM, I guess. It's one of the most valuable commodities in MLS, and the Rapids just simply don't have it. I think that they're a little better than you have them. They're anonymous for sure. But again, just such a massive turnover. It is very rare in MLS, and it's even rarer in MLS lately to see a team be able to go with that much turnover and be successful immediately. You do need to have some level of stability for a couple seasons before you can truly jump up and dominate. So that leaves you to your number 9, Kevin.
My number 9 is LAFC, your team that you put last in the Western Conference. The only reason why it's higher than 12 for me is their defense, their back line. Basically, Laramee and Zimmerman. God, I would like them in Montreal right now because they are needed. But it really shows you that maybe they'll be leaking a bit of goals, but they should be at least not conceding as much as Minnesota was in their first few games last year. Remember, like it was 17-2 or something when the amount of goals scored and against for Minnesota at the beginning. So I do feel LA will have a bit more defensively sound. They will be, and Bob Bradley will bring a bit of organization, and you'll have Zimmerman and Laurent giving you a bit of consistent, at least stability and some prestance, some. Not that it will instill fear into other attackers, but because of their reputation and their experience in this league, they're not going to be treated as cones either. So I think it's a good decision by Bob Bradley to get those two defenders to start your history in the league with this club. And I feel LA is not going to have an easy year, but it's not going to be as tough as it was for Minnesota. 9 out of 12, still 3 position out of the playoff spot. I figured they'll be about 8 to 10 points behind a playoff spot, so not close, but at least they won't be last.
I'll save the rest of my thoughts to LA when we talk about them in the general questions.
Terrible jersey.
I do have.
By the way, I have to say terrible jersey. The YouTube TV thing doesn't look good at all on the jersey. It kind of clashes with the rest of it. And yeah, I don't know if we have any Kit Nerd out there, but that one's terrible.
All right, that's a shout out to Kit Nerd Mark of the Vocal Minority Podcast, which is my favorite non-podcast that I don't do with an MLS. At any rate, give them a listen. And I am on it sometimes. So
like once a month, usually.
Yes. All right. So we're number 8 now. So number 8 is for me a team that was in the Western Conference Final last year, but seemed to be doing it with mirrors most of the season and have lost one of their core players who had a bit of a bounce back season last year in Cubo Torres. I'm picking the Houston Dynamo at number 8. We agree.
Me too. They don't have Kubo anymore, so that's why they're going to drop down a bit. But not usually Houston, it's all or nothing, right? Remember they used to go either to do like the MLS Cup final versus LA back then, like 2011, 2012, 2013, or like finish last. At least they'll be a little higher, but still not in the playoffs for Houston.
Yeah, and look, the other thing about Houston is, we watched them evolve last year. The instinct was, they must have players, coming into their own, and finally, young players developing. No, they're old. They were the oldest. They were the oldest team in the league. So
Ricardo Clark was still there. That's when you know.
Yeah, it was just a team that I felt was probably overachieving last year, and we saw that. They're the Colorado Rapids of this year, likely. Is a fair way to put it. All right, that brings us to number
the Rapids of 2016. Yeah, remember they made it to the Western Conference Finals.
Exactly. Exactly.
Number 7.
All right,
you go ahead.
So this is your last non-playoff team in the West, and this is where I'm going to go way off chalk and way off conventional thinking for most of the previews that I've looked at heading into this. And I've sort of hinted at it before a couple times, and the Jordan Morris injury is what tipped me over the balance. Yeah. I am picking the Seattle Sounders to miss the playoffs for the first time in their history, to go from the MLS Cup final 2 years in a row to not in the playoffs. And I think it's just a combination of Clint Dempsey maybe hitting a wall, an older defense hitting a wall, because they do rely a lot still on a very older back line, and they moved some key players around, and then this Morris injury off the top, which they have a lot of money tied on the cap with him, sort of makes this a difficult situation for them. And I don't think, I've seen a lot of people picking them high, but I wonder how much of that's reputation and history rather than looking at the roster right now. So I do have the Sounders for the first time in their history since the launch in 2009, missing the playoffs this year at number 7, which is, I have them as a bubble team, but just missing.
I have them a little higher, but I'll go further in your point that you're making, saying that is Brian Schmetzer going to finish the season? What I'm saying is, remember how he was interim, and then after Sigi Schmidt was fired, he was named the interim a little less than 2 years ago. And he had to basically win the MLS Cup to come back as a coach the year after. He basically had to win it all to get that full head coach job and not just that interim tag. How long will the leash be if it's not going the way Seattle's expecting it to be? Of course, you have the Jordan Morth injury. That does give you like an excuse, quote unquote. But I wouldn't be surprised if Brian Schmetzer, by the end of the season, is one of the coaches in the hot seat because of where Major League Soccer is going. The new type of coach that comes into the league have a different profile than Brian Schmetzer. And yes, the team Brian Schmetzer is coaching right now is perfect for him. Will Seattle in 2 years be? And how quickly does the transition happen? And it can happen quickly sometimes not even a year. You can go from being in the Eastern Conference Final to changing your coach and changing everything about your team. Hello, Montreal. So you never know what can happen, and I feel Seattle might be that case. But in my 7th position, Duane, in my Western Conference prediction, I have FC Dallas. I have them outside of the playoffs. They haven't convinced me in the CONCACAF Champions League last week. Lost to Toro, both games. What's going on there? FC Dallas having some trouble last year, the way they finished the season. And to me, it's going to continue like this. They sold a few good players. They sold a few good academy products. Maybe they didn't sell the right ones, and they're paying the price. And FC Dallas outside of the playoffs in 2018.
All right. I'll wait. It's not too long, so I'm going to be talking about them. So I'll wait to give my thoughts there. And jump to my number 6. So the first playoff team, the final wild card team, the maybe in some ways the worst position to finish in MLS, because I don't know how it'll be many years. If they keep this current playoff format, I would be hard pressed to see a number 6 seed ever win an MLS Cup, just because of the nature of what they have to go through with, to basically 2 of the first 3 home games. They'd have to get hot on the road at the very right time. But I'm picking as my number 6 and just in the playoffs team as the Vancouver Whitecaps. The Whitecaps aren't going. Yeah, they are bad, but they're not good, and that's what I sort of come away with. And there's too much turnover there too. A lot of their core players that they really have relied on over the past few years are gone. The Tim Parker stuff swirling around there still too. This is a team that, as I said, they're not bad, but they're not good. And I think there's going to be more of the same this year. And not to beat this dead horse, and it is so dead. I've been beating this horse since it's been dead for like 5 years now. They need to spend money at some point if they want to get out of this like middling zone. And they can spend money. They don't have to spend money on DPs. They can spend more money on, say, relaunching a USL team, doing more on the development side. Really, maybe going into more of a model that Dallas is using, where if they really feel that they're too poor, that they could be buying these young South Americans and selling them, at an earlier stage when they're rising up rather than when they're coming down. It's going to be, I think, not a tough season, but not a memorable season either in Vancouver, and that's just where I see them.
6 out of 12. Do you have any more mid-table than that? I don't think so.
Yeah,
and you're lucky that 50% of the Western Conference will make the playoffs, and that is the reason why for me, Vancouver will be 6th. It'll be a drop from last year, but better than 2 years ago. It's continuing. It's going to start part of the course for the Whitecaps. I don't think they're having that player that will make the difference from 6th to 3rd. And I don't think they're going to be as lucky as last year. Last year, the West was so weird, and it was so there was so much parity that we're able to finish a lot higher than we anticipated, even though it didn't go as planned in the playoffs. Still, Vancouver was the best, one of the best teams in the Western Conference late in the season, and it propelled them to 3rd spot in the West, close to winning outright the Western Conference if it wasn't for one loss to finish the season. But yeah, Vancouver 6 for me as well.
All right, so jumping to my number 5, and I'm going to go to Dallas here. And look, Dallas is a team that I think can go either way. I have them on the lower side because of how they finished last season, because of the Champions League game this year, although how much Dallas prioritizes the Champions League is always up for debate, right? The Acosta injury, he's out for a few months to start the season. That's going to hurt their sort of regular season play. But I do think that having watched this team win a Supporters' Shield and U.S. Open Cup just 2 seasons ago, I'm not completely ready to give up on them. But at the same time, they had a Rudy back then. They had that sort of secondary scoring, which is gone now. The model that they use, I think, can have one good season every 3. And, maybe the other 2 are sort of figuring themselves out, because that's the nature of the beast when you're trying to rotate through a lot of kids that you're developing. I like what Dallas is using. I'm a fan of Dallas's approach, but I don't think that this particular version of FC Dallas is a championship contending team, but they are a playoff team. So I'm going to put them in at 5th in the West. So I guess you've already spoke about them. If you want to go more, go ahead. If not, just jump to your number 5.
My number 5 is Seattle. So we basically inverted 5th and 7th for both of us. For me, it's Seattle, and this was had them a bit higher, and they keep on dropping. And with the Jordan Morris injury, they might be even outside of the playoff. But for now, I have Seattle in 5th position in the Western Conference. A bit of drop from last year, maybe just not as much of a big of a drop as the rest of the conference, maybe catching up to them and the likes of other teams I'm going to mention soon. But I do see Seattle in 5th.
All right, so that goes to 4th. 5th place, 4th.
Yeah.
4th. I'm on 4th, right? Yes, exactly. Okay. And before I go into 4, I'm going to say a caveat of the teams I'm about to go through in the West. All 4 of these teams I could see going first.
Yeah.
I could see going 4th, but I have to order them, so I'm going to. And I'm going to start with SKC. Kansas City is number 4 for me because there's a little bit too much turnover for my likes. But they're just a team that always consists. I've got to sort of point to the history. People pointing to history with Seattle. I'm going to point to the history with SKC. They're always there, and this is a very strong organization that does things right. So I think that the changeover and the turnover is going to make it a little bit challenging for them, particularly at the start. But I do see them stabilizing and sort of coming into one of those positions where if they get hot at the right time, I could see SKC, going to an MLS Cup final again. So. Number 4 for me, for SKC.
My number 4 is RSL. I think Real Salt Lake will be continuing to evolve. I think now with a full off season for Mike Petke, he's going into this season with a lot more promise. He's going to be able to mold the identity of play, the players themselves, the attitude, the instincts correctly from the beginning, and not there's 3 weeks in. So I do feel for RSL, they're going to have a lot of a better beginning of the season. And if you go back to last year, the way they finished the season, add to that a better beginning of the season, and RSL's top 4 of the Western Conference, and that's exactly where I put them, 4 in the Western Conference.
Well, and I have them 3rd, so we might as well just keep going here, right? What they did, they started the season so poorly last year. They were in last overall June 1st. And they pulled themselves up and were one of the hottest teams down the stretch. And MLS is not a league where you can necessarily look at that and go, oh, well, that's predictive of next year. But the way that they were built around Petke's sort of approach of building very, very young, they were exceptionally young, maybe one of the youngest teams in MLS history at points last year. And their slump corresponded with the U20 World Cup when they were losing players for that. When those players came back, they started to excel, and they started to do what we're used to doing with RSL. They missed the playoffs last year based on that slow start. That was the first time in a long time for them. I think they're back in this year, and not only that, I think they're back in with a shout to go deep in those playoffs because I like what Petke does. I think he's one of the most underrated coaches in this league. I don't know, is he underrated? I don't even know, but certainly I have always been a fan of what he does, and I believe that RSL has rebuilt this thing. They recognized that they needed to make a change a couple of years ago, and they went in and they did it. So good for them, and I do think that they're back on track to be the RSL that we're used to seeing.
And now moving to my 3rd position, trying to finish the Western Conference pretty quickly, the LA Galaxy. I have a feeling with the new crops of player, especially the TAM and GAM players of the Galaxy, that even though they already had 3 DPs, they were able to get a lot of good players in depth chart number 4 to 8. So you'll have like almost 2 sets of DPs for LA. You do have the feeling of, look, we got some real competition now in the city. It's not just the GOATs. It's real competition with money and attitude. We need to get our gears together, and we need to play better. And I think the Galaxy is going to finish 3rd in the Western Conference for those reasons.
And this is becoming easy because we're sort of one position behind in many cases, which allows me to just continue on. I have LA 2nd, and which then you know where I'm going with 1st.
Yeah, and you know where I got 2 left too, so exactly.
Yeah, so the Galaxy are 2nd on my list. They've made a lot of good changes, a lot of good solid MLS changes. We're on this show, we're fans of the MLS lifers. They've added a few of those, but I think how LA goes there will really depend on how Gio goes. If Gio plays like an MVP, this is a team that could potentially win the Shield and win the Cup. They could challenge a TFC. They could challenge an NYCFC. They could challenge whoever else I might have in the top of the East. We'll have to wait and find out in a minute. But, so far he's been a little underwhelming in terms of his MLS play, if you ask me. And the wooden spoon finish last year was a little bit unexpected, but we certainly did see a fallback. But the Galaxy, to me, they're still the Galaxy, right? And the Galaxy have a history of having like one every 6 seasons where they finish last overall and then win 3 MLS Cups in the next 5 or 6 years, right? So that's the Galaxy.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so go on there, Kevin.
My second is, and my second and your first is Portland Timbers. The only reason why I put them second and not first is the Gio Savarese variable in the equation. Is he going to be able in his first year in Major League Soccer to win the Western Conference? Maybe yes, maybe no. But I do feel Portland's got the type of team that can climb quickly the standings and stay up there. I put them second. They could be first. Duane has them in the first spot in the Western Conference. I do have some, not necessarily reservations at all, and not worries either. But he's a new MLS head coach. He's going to have some... he's going to get acclimatized, even though he's been coaching in North America for a long time. I do have a feeling that second might be where Portland ends, but you have them in first, Duane, and why?
Well, I have them at first because I always have an adage where I believe that the best player is, when in doubt, you break ties by who has the best player, and Valeri is the best player. Yeah, there's some, and they've added some interesting talent there too. I have a tremendous home field advantage in Portland, which is why in a regular season situation, I'm going to always favor them a little bit higher than maybe I might in a playoff situation. All those intangibles sort of put them, for me, breaking that tie with that 1-4 mix that I talked about there. I can see them finishing fourth easily, but I'm picking them first because of Valeri, because of the Timbers Army, basically, because of sort of the home advantage that they have out there. And, you got to have a first-place team from Cascadia, right? That's a rule, I think, in MLS. Except you have SKC, which is a rule of Kevin, if you listen to the show.
Well, there you go. That's why I was like, okay, I got my 3 teams left. Who's which? I'm like, well, you know what? One of these days it's going to happen. If I keep picking them first, one of these days they're going to win the West. One of these days they'll prove me right. Sporting Kansas City. Again, for the 3rd year in a row. I choose them first in the West. Just because I can.
All right, and I've already spoken to them. So why don't we take a quick break, come back, and we'll do the East.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back. We traveled a few thousand miles and now in the Eastern Conference, and we'll start with number 11, bottom of the Eastern Conference, I'll start this time around. And for me, the only reason why I put them this deep, this far, almost has nothing to do with the players. There's going to be a lot of distractions in that city this year. Is it the last year this city has a Major League Soccer club? Is it going to move to Austin or not, or maybe, or whatever? Columbus will have a lot of distractions. A lot of players will be distracted. Players like Federico Higuain, who loves Columbus, doesn't want to go to Austin. Will he play for that club the entire season? Will he get traded? Will we see the club fire sell Hassat in the middle of the season because they know they're going to move somewhere else? Who knows? But the amount of distractions, controversy will lead to a lack of result and consistency on the pitch. They traded all the good players. Ola Kamara's gone to Columbus. 11th in the East for me.
I think I'll talk about them more in a bit, but I do have them higher. I think that they did trade their 2 best players for sure. They are a systems team in many ways, but So that could allow them to go higher, but the distraction hanging over them is going to be something that is going to be interesting to watch, to say the least. I'll hold off on the rest of my thoughts until I get them on my list. All right, my last place team. We're both going to go a little bit outside the convention with our last place pick here, and I'm going to especially go off. I am picking the Orlando to finish last in the East because they're a mess. That team is a cluster. Their organization, all top to bottom. I don't believe in Dom Dwyer. They brought in a bunch of older players to try and center this rebuild around to play in 40-degree Celsius heat throughout the summer. They barely won games at home last year. I think Kyle Larin, despite the distractions off the pitch, will be missed. I don't trust them to make good buys. Yes, on paper, this team is much more talented than last place, but there's always a surprise bad team in MLS. LA was that team last year.
He was, yeah.
I am picking Orlando to be that bad team that no one is picking this year. And in fact, I'm picking them very bottom of the East because I look at Orlando City and I say, that reminds me of a club that I used to follow. Well, I still follow very closely, but they almost seem like it seems like I'm following a different club now than I did back in 2011, right? And the Orlando City, the way that they run things, the way that they treat people, the way that they make decisions just consistently reminds me of what TFC used to do. So yeah, they're last. They're last. That's what my pick is.
All right. My number 10 in the Eastern Conference is Philly for many reasons that they have been there the last few years. They had some surprise success over the last few years when not expected. Last year wasn't the case. I have a feeling that the acquisition that they made, will they pan out? I don't know. But just the lay of the land in the Eastern Conference, the top teams are so good and you have to play them 3 times, so it's defeats. I think the difference between 6th and 10 won't be that big, but because of the very top-heavy Eastern Conference, just to play for 500 will be difficult. And if you play for 500, in my mind, you'll be like 8 just because of the difficulty of the top of the standing. So Philly in 10, not necessarily with a terrible record, but just the teams above, especially above that red line, are so good that it's just going to be difficult just to compete.
All right. We're a little bit further spread in our East picks than we were in our West picks, so I'll wait for my thoughts on Philly. And with apologies, Kevin, perhaps,
fine.
Well, I don't think it's perhaps. In the Eastern Conference, the worst team on playoffs, on paper, I should say, by far is the Montreal Impact right now. There are so many questions. You cannot overhaul a back line and expect it to instantly gel. It can. It's not to say it's impossible, but to expect it to instantly expect it is something that it's a bit much.
Yeah, but to be fair, to be fair, on Sunday, Duane, 3 of those 4 spots starting will be players from last year. They're not necessarily a big overhaul as a whole. It's just one guy injured. Cabrera will be in the midfield. You'll have Daniel Lovitz, and you will have Chris Duval, which are 3 players from last year too. So the overhaul is at 1 or 2 position, but due to injuries, we won't even see that overhaul. But I think the overhaul is a bit more in perception than in reality. The overhaul is more in the midfield and striker position, even though the needs are in defensive position. But yes, there's a big injuries in defense.
And I think the overhaul is also in philosophy and direction. And I think that there's going to be a lot of feeling out. And I suspect that even behind the scenes, there's been an understanding that this season is going to be experimental, to put it at least. Obviously, they'll take any success they can get. And I don't welcome, I'm not a typical cliche Toronto fan that wants the Impact to fail. I don't want the Canadian teams to be successful, even the Whitecaps, although I do enjoy playing the villain on that side a little bit, I'll fully admit.
A little bit more, yeah.
At any rate, but there's so many questions to me in terms of what they do, and I'm not convinced that they know exactly what works in terms of purchasing right now. So until I see otherwise, I have to pick them low.
All right.
Realistically, I would have picked them last in the conference, except for I wanted to make my point about Orlando. But this is a team that has a lot of questions, we'll say, and leave it at that.
So you have Montreal Impact at 10. And my 9th position is a perennial favorite for the bottom of the Eastern Conference. They'll be there again this year. Lack of investment in the team, in the structure of the team, in the infrastructure of the team, to the players, with a brand new coach now, Brad Friedel, who has no experience coaching at any level whatsoever. And New England Revolution will be 9th, if not lower. but I wanted to make my point with Columbus, like Duane. And it's hard to put Philly and New England. Who's better? Who's worse? I chose New England just because. Who knows? But they'll be 9th, I think, in the Eastern Conference.
All right. We'll wait for them as well. I'm just jumping to my next pick, which is going to be the Chicago Fire, which will be a disappointment for a lot of people. But I can remember the last time an old gimpy German tried to lead an MLS team. That would be the 2011 TFC Torsten Frings squad. Schweinsteiger doesn't really have much left in the tank, I don't think. This is a team that greatly overachieved last year and then dumped their probably most talented player.
Yeah, true.
I just don't see the Fire replicating it. They're not the worst team in the league by far, but I just don't see them replicating their success last year. And also, you look at the way they finished. And again, it's not necessarily predictive, but it's becoming more predictive as MLS stabilizes a little bit more. It used to be in the past, you'd see vast turnovers in schedule and finishing and everything got year to year. I think you're going to see less and less in that. So when you see a team that really had a hot 2 months and then limped to the finish line and basically crapped the bed in the playoffs, you kind of have to look at that and go, maybe that was an outlier. The good was the outlier, not the bad. And Chicago has many more years of bad to point to in recent years that I have trouble seeing them not being what they were at the end of the year last year. So I have them in third last in the East, which is what ninth, right? Yeah.
And
all right.
Moving on, plowing through my 8th position is a Montreal Impact for a reason that Duane just mentioned. I don't like to use transition because it's not necessarily transition. It's more than that to me. It's a discovery year. It's laying the grassroots work, laying the foundation for the next 2 years. This is the discovery year of Rémi Garde. It's not going to be easy. We'll have glimpses of great things to come from Saphir Taider and others. And we'll have glimpses of back to reality with big losses against big teams. Like on March 17th at the Big O, I'm not expecting a huge result. It's the best team we've ever faced, probably, like Toronto. So it's going to be difficult, but Montreal 8th in the Eastern Conference, in my opinion.
All right, you played Club America, so it's maybe not the best team you ever faced. All right, so let's keep moving up the thing here. You've already talked about them, so I'm going to go with New England at the next spot here. There's just first off, I think Brad Friedel was a terrible hire.
I was being nice. So, yeah.
Just an absolute terrible hire. I mean, if you hired him as an assistant, great. Let him evolve. But to hire it's stupid. It's old boys club personified. It's probably cheap personified, too. I can't imagine he commanded a lot of money in a head coaching position. And that's cheap. That should be the New England Revolution. It's called the New England Cheapskates. That's really what it is.
It's literally taking the same blueprint of Jay Heaps and redoing it again. I'm like, okay, we're going to save ourselves another 4 or 5 years. So here we go.
Yeah. Add Lee Wynn into this mix, who's, gonna
doesn't want to be there?
Yeah, it's like
him?
Zero at TFC. It's like Zero at TFC. And
2011.
Yeah, exactly. When he didn't want to be there and, he wasn't there after 2 or 3 weeks. And I suspect it'd be the same thing. But all the uncertainty hanging around this team.
New England, though. History, New England, they'll be like, well, if we don't get what we want, guess what? You're just not going to play. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens.
Yeah, but it's also taking one of their few bright spots away. And the other thing, too, if you've been following them in the preseason at all, basically Friedel's approach is to go old school English. He wants them to play very direct and get stuck in and stuff like that. And I think the way MLS is getting refereed nowadays, you get too stuck in, you're going to be playing with 9 men someday. It's like this is... I think it's a disaster of a hire, and I have no confidence in it whatsoever. So that's my take on the Revolution.
When you have New England at 8, let's go a little quicker to finish this, so we have time to do our questions before we say goodbye for today. For me, in 7th position, DC United, better than last year, but not that much better. I don't have them in the playoff just because of the top 3-4 teams, especially the top 3 teams in the Eastern Conference, are so good that it will create a gap, and you will see like three different groupings of teams in the Eastern Conference in my mind. The top 3, then from 4 to 8, and then 9 to 10. So I do feel that position 4 to 8 are a bit interchangeable, depending of a result here and there. But DCU 7th in my mind because of the distractions of the new stadium. Yes, it's going to be great. How do you feel? It's going to be great, but you're not there yet, and you have to get there, and you're going to find a bit of a it's not going to be comfortable until you get there, and once you get there, you'll find your marks. But it's not going to be that easy. So I have DCU just outside the playoffs.
All right, so we'll just do one at a time. So I have 7th. I have Columbus. You spoke of them already. I think Columbus is better than people give them credit for, but I also think that the distraction and the ownership there is going to make this a challenging season for them, as you sort of implied. And I'm going to go even further to say that the ownership may in fact command that them to drop more assets as the years go on. Yeah. So I can see them starting better than they finish. And I have them just as a bubble playoff team as a result. So we'll jump into your first playoff team then, Kevin.
I chose Orlando just because of the amount of change they have made. They have brought some talent. Yes, talents that are a little old, like the Clash Towns. But I do feel with the Coleman as well. He's younger, so Coleman brings us some youth. But I do feel they have better result. They don't necessarily have a direction, long-term direction with the play and the identity and that. But here and there, good results. They're gonna, like I mentioned, 4 to 8 in my mind are interchangeable a bit. But Orlando is gonna be more successful than we think, but not good enough to challenge the top 3 of the East. Maybe I'm a bit optimistic here, but I chose Orlando 6th.
All right, I have DC United as my first playoff team. I think that they will finish the season better than they end it. DC has a history of going up, down, up, down, up, down. This would be the up season for them, up in the sense that they're going to finish 6th in my mind. The road schedule to start the season is going to be very challenging for them. I don't think that especially when they have a lot of new bodies, and that could be a good thing though, in the sense that it allows them to gel a little bit on the long road trip. I think it really did actually help TFC in that first season where they kind of emerged and became a playoff team for the first time to have the long road streak. So I could see DC having a similar sort of effect there. But all by and large, it's not going to be a spectacular season. And really for them, I think this is about setting themselves up so that their first full season in the new stadium is one that will allow them to contend a little bit more.
My 5th position in the East is the New York Red Bulls. A bit of a drop. They're not necessarily top 3 in the East anymore. Atlanta has overtaken the Red Bulls' position in power rankings in my mind in the East. Still, though, a worker-like team with a few great players but no superstars will continue to achieve great results under Jesse Marsh this year. 5th, because there's a few teams in my mind that are better and better players than the Red Bulls, but still a playoff team that could be dangerous. No one ever wants to face the Red Bulls in the playoffs. It ain't your father's Metro Stars. Like, it's not just an easy point in the playoff anymore. But still, Red Bulls, 5th in the East.
All right, my 5th place pick is the Philadelphia Union. They have a couple nice pieces, and they've got maybe one of the most spectacular keepers in the league. That helps, but really what I'm basing this on is some reports I've been reading on some of the talent level they have coming in as young players. So really, I'm rolling the dice a little bit with this pick. They could crash out. They could be last as easy as they could be at this position. But what I've read, what I've heard about these young players that bring in, I think there's a potential that in what is a mushy East. I mean, people talked about the East being better than the West last year. Maybe at the top and at the bottom, it was sloppy to say the least.
Very top
in that in the sloppy middle to bottom, I could see Philadelphia if those kids start to play with energy and with the fitness, and that matters in MLS, then I could see them jumping up to this position. So that's why I have them much higher than I think most people do.
Yeah, my 4th spot is Chicago. I feel like the progress made last year will continue. Yes, you've lost David Akam, but you do have Nikolic still there, and with the coach Pavlovic and Schweinsteiger coming back. And yeah, it's not going to be necessarily easy, and 4th and 8 can be interchangeable, of course. But for me, Chicago will be maybe the best of the rest. There's going to be a big gap between my number 4 and number 3 in points. Like, I imagine like almost 8 points different at the end of the season in the standings between the top 3 and Chicago. But for me, Chicago number 4.
All right. Here we're jumping into the 4 teams I would consider the legitimate contenders to win the East, both in the regular season and the playoffs. And we'll start at number 4, where I do have the Red Bulls. Kaku, the player that they brought in, is an interesting prospect. and one that we're not sure whether he'll see the field right away or whether we might take a while to sort of break him in. I think that might mean that they start a little bit slower than you might think otherwise. But what I really like about the Red Bulls is what they're quietly doing. They're Dallas North, right, in terms of their ability to find and develop prospects, and they're doing very well at the USL level. They're probably the most successful MLS2 team at USL.
Hands
I think
down,
that has value.
Easily. Like, they've won the USL, which,
Exactly. And sort of that philosophy combined with sort of their move to as I made the analogy when we had Daniel on, I called them the New Jersey Devils. And when NYCFC came in,
it's true.
They became the New York Rangers, right? The sexy team. And they said, okay, well, we got to be the Devils. But here's the thing about the Devils. The Devils have won more cups than the Rangers.
Especially the last 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah. They're more successful than the Rangers. So this is I think a model that New Jersey, which is, that's not a disrespect when I call them New Jersey Red Bulls, because they do play in New Jersey. They've embraced their New Jersey.
Harrison. What's up, Harrison? I think we have the same top three in the East, Duane. I'm pretty sure we do. So let's go with number 3. Team that second year in existence in Major League Soccer. They're doing great. Same core as last year. Atlanta, number 3 for me, just part of the course. Continuation of last year's project with just maybe even more goals scored.
Yeah, I mean, we have them both at 3. I think we have the exact same order as well. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe you want to be contrarian and flip 2 and 1, but
no, I got the same one. Come on.
Yeah, I think Atlanta will improve on their season of last year a little bit, but they're still pretty weak at the back. So I think that when I said there's 4 legitimate contenders in the East, I think it's a list of 2 and 2. And this is, the better of the 2 teams on the other side of things. They have a lot of high-end attacking talent. That 18-year-old kid they brought in could be all world, or he could really struggle to adjust. We don't know yet.
Barco's out for 6 weeks though, so that's a blow for Atlanta. But they have some depth as well. Maybe not as deep as the team we chose at number 1, but they're pretty deep.
Yeah, it's going to come down to how well they defend. And I think that this makes sense too. The way that they built this team, it was always going to be a bit attack heavy, and I think that makes sense in MLS in a lot of ways. The adage about defense winning championships, it doesn't play out in MLS, as I've said many, many times before. So they've gone that way. But if they leak goals, they could be TFC 2015, which is a hell of a lot of fun to watch. But they won't. They didn't necessarily win the championship at the end of the day, right? So that's why I have them in at 3 for now. But their certainly trajectory is up. There's no doubt about it.
Quickly finishing this, because we both have TFC first, because we can see with our eyes and are able to differentiate teams. And TFC is going to be Supporters Shield favorite, MLS Cup favorite. We all know. We all think that's going to be the case. And they're number 1 in our Eastern Conference. Preview and predictions for both Duane and I and our number 2 teams in the East, NYCFC. Just continuation of the great project of Patrick Vieira, taking care of the points. They do so at home. They do need so. They have a great home field advantage, knowing how to make the most at a Yankee Stadium, and then learning to travel and learning the intricacies of Major League Soccer, and maybe for Patrick Vieira, learning how to manage in the playoffs. Once that's learned, they'll be a very dangerous team. But second for NYCFC, and of course TFC number 1 in the East.
Yeah, quickly, TFC, I think I've spoken at length with them, and they're just good. They're better on paper than they were last year. So we'll leave it at that. And I'm going to say just one thing with NYCFC. The only question they have really smartly built this offseason. They have addressed the areas that they were weakest in. But the one question I have with them is a good question to have, and it's whether Villa can hold it off for one more year. There is eventually going to come a time. Here, I use hockey analogies on this show all the time. I'll use a baseball analogy here for this time. Jose Bautista was a star. He owned this city for years. And we all brought him back for one last year, and then suddenly he hit a wall.
The one too many. The extra one. The one that shouldn't have ended. We should have had it last year.
Yeah, I'm not going to suggest that David Villa is quite at the same stage that Batista was, because I don't think he is. But even if he were to go from like a 20-goal scorer to a 15-goal scorer, that would make a difference of probably 5 to 6 points in the season, and that could be a considerable different thing. So that's my only question with NYCFC, but this is certainly a team to watch out for this year.
And to finish our predictions show, Duane, let's go through 7 questions. that we will try to go quickly, but 7 questions that could be predictions for the 2018 Major League Soccer season. Duane, what will be the biggest story of 2018, in your opinion?
We've already talked about it. It was the biggest story. Yeah, it was the biggest story of 2017 too, really, other than TFC's success. It was the Columbus Crew relocation. And I don't think it's going to have a happy ending for Columbus, and that's going to make a lot of people angry.
Yeah.
But I think that will be by far the biggest story of 2018. It's going to dominate the question, the conversation outside of the results.
My prediction for biggest story of 2018 will be when the second MLS franchise is announced. Who is it going to be? Is it going to be Cincy joining Nashville? Is it going to be Sacramento? Or is it going to be Detroit? The 3 cities left in the 4 cities were chosen. And we'll know that soon. We're supposed to know a few weeks ago, and we still don't. But we're going to know that soon. And that will be one of the biggest story in my mind for the 2018 season. What will be the biggest disappointment, Duane? Outside of Columbus moving. Outside of Columbus moving to Austin.
Fair enough. I think Chicago Fire then will be the biggest disappointment, because I think they really want that franchise to excel, that market to excel, and I have a feeling that, as I mentioned in the previews, that they're going to slip back pretty badly. And, Schweinsteiger is going to be gone, and they've rolled the dice on the big name DP, and which was an MLS 1.0 move, and they're just going to continue to slide down. And then you combine that with Boston, so I'll make that. The continuation of 2 of the biggest and most important markets in the league to struggle, Chicago to go back to struggling, and Boston to continue its long road into irrelevancy. That will be the biggest disappointment, outside of the fact that the Austin, whatever the hell they're going to be called, are going to be created at some point.
Please don't call them the Aztecs. That never worked. All right. My biggest disappointment will be, in my mind, the lack of transparency when the second expansion team is announced, and when we'll realize that it won't be Sacramento, even though they're filling their stadium all the time, and hopefully it's Cincinnati, but that could be a disappointment for me. Number 3, will Zlatan Ibrahimovic take his talent to Carson City Beach? And if so, will he be good?
Yes, sort of.
Yes, and good for like 20 minutes late in games to score a free kick, because if he can't play 90 in Premier League, there's no way he can play 90 running more in MLS.
I think that Zlatan will make the mistake Beckham made in his first season. He will assume he will come over here and be playing in a house league.
Oh,
and he will quickly find out that there are going to be players that are going to come in hard on him and be like, "Welcome to MLS, blank," and that will be like, he'll be like, "This is not what I signed up for." Or Pirlo the same way, right? And
that image of Pirlo covering the back post to be like, yeah. Is it November yet?
This is I should be drinking wine somewhere. This is ridiculous. Like, no.
Remember a year ago on Instagram, they had the image of cleats on the beach by Pirlo. Like, no, Pirlo, you're coming back. You have to play one more season.
Exactly. Zlatan, I think, wants to go to Hollywood, not Carson. So that will be the difference. But yeah,
he'll arrive at the airport and get his ride. Like, yeah. Where are we going? Thought it was no. We're playing a little bit further. But I want to be here. No, just follow us. All right. Is LAFC more Minnesota or more Atlanta?
Both.
Thanks, Duane. That doesn't help at all.
I think the results are going to be more Minnesota. Their approach is obviously going to be more Atlanta, and they will finish the season closer to Atlanta than Minnesota, but the overall season will look like Minnesota. It's going to be a weird season in LA, I think, and they're going to be much better next year. That's my prediction on LAFC.
Who will be the MVP, which stands for Most Valuable Player of each Canadian teams in the league?
Okay, the MVP of Toronto FC will be, I'll just list all 3, and then you can list all 3 of your choices. The MVP of Toronto FC is going to be Michael Bradley. That is going to be a literal interpretation of what the award would mean, most valuable player to his team. That is not the most outstanding player, which is another player altogether. And Bradley is the glue that holds this team together. He's, his tackle against Columbus is every bit LeBron's block, right? That's the third sport I've referenced outside soccer today.
Geez, you're just missing like curling, and you got the sports podcasting that they're trifecta.
Exactly. Well, and then in terms of Montreal, I'm going to have to go with the Jennifer Jones of the Impact. I don't want to be too cute with this one.
You got to take Piatti.
Yeah, it's Piatti, exactly. And he's the best player. He's the most talented player in that team, and he's the most important player on what's going to be a very struggling team. And the only question with Piatti is whether or not they look to maybe sell in the summer if they are struggling to build. But I suspect that they will want to keep him around to appease their fans.
There's no way Piatti plays anywhere else in MLS. There's no way that ever happens. Just because of how important his family and the environment and how he grows, his environment surrounding to him. And he's got a contract for 2 years left, 6 months that were left right now, plus the 18 months that were added late last year. I have a feeling that the Impact would not be able to trade a Piatti without a revolt from the player.
All right, and for the Whitecaps, I'm going to go a bit outside the box and maybe be a bit hopeful about this as well. And I think it's going to be a bit cute with the pick as well. I'm going to go with Alphonso Davies. I think he's going to have a 10-goal season. That's not necessarily going to be the best player in the Whitecaps. It's not necessarily going to be, in the conversation for best 11 or anything like that. But with the Whitecaps season they're having and sort of some frustration in that market, I think having that kid to rally around and to market around is going to be very important for them. And he is going to be an offensive presence on the team and is going to be a solid contributing regular starter for them this year. He's penciled in to be a regular starter now and is going to, the reins are off, I think. Yeah. So I'm going to go with Davies as their most valuable player with kind of a cute pick. So I went with a literal pick, an obvious pick, and a cute pick on my three.
And for Davies, to all the Vancouver Whitecaps fans listening to this, enjoy him while you can. You can never know when you lose your wonder kid. Hello, Baloo. Hope you're doing well in Barcelona. And Davey's going to be 18 this year. And as soon as he's 18, it's bye-bye, Alfonso.
Fair enough. All right.
My MVP's Piatti, Giovinco, just because of his... I think we'll see the Giovinco of 2 years ago for the amount of goals scored, and he won't be able to choose anybody else. So I think it's going to be Piatti from Montreal, Giovinco for Toronto, and Kai Kamara has always scored a lot, either against Vancouver and now for Vancouver. So you have Kai Kamara for Vancouver, Giovinco, and Piatti. Yes, I'm going chalk.
All right.
The other question to finish, the Golden Boot, Duane. Who's going to be the Golden Boot in the entire league?
I picked New York City FC to finish second, which suggests to me, to anyone who listened to what I said, what my one question with them is, that I answered my own question. David Villa will win the Golden Boot. That is my answer on whether he has more time left in him.
I'm a bit troubled by this question because I feel we're going to have a young striker somewhere come out and score a bunch of goals and be able to score 13, 14, 15 and be close to the Golden Boot conversation. Who that is, I don't know. But I think I'm going to go with Giovinco for me. Just because Giovinco 2 years ago scored a bunch of goals, a bunch of assists last year because of injuries and the more spread offense, you could say, of Toronto. But I feel this year he'll want to have, on top of winning everything, you want to have a little golden shoe on his mantle. So maybe he will be scoring a lot of goals. And MLS Cup finalists and winner, Supporter Shield, USOC, Wooden Spoon, and V-Cup. How about you start with
right.
MLS Cup and finalists?
Well, I think we should end with that. Shouldn't
okay,
we not?
So let's go with the V-Cup then.
All right, the V-Cup, TFC is going to win the V-Cup. They're the most the deepest team, and it matters the most to them. Montreal, I think, is going to punt it this year. Vancouver is Vancouver, and the Ottawa Fury aren't going to win it. And it would be hilarious if I picked, Vaughan, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, the Vaughan Azzurri. Come on, Vaughan Azzurri will win the Canadian. No. I think I agree with you. Toronto, just because of their depth, will win the Voyageurs Cup. Wooden Spoon, last team in the Major League Soccer standings combined.
I think it's going to be LAFC. I'm going to go back and go against conventional wisdom. I think that the lack of depth is really going to hurt them, and to try and change a team in the summer window or after the season has started is a mistake. I do think that they will probably be well down the standings at some point and will come back with a good end of the season after they start to evolve together. I just think there's too much questions at depth, and if you lose a player when you only have 12 that you start or you want to start, you're going to have a vulnerability on that pitch that the teams are going to focus on. And I think the West top to bottom is deeper than the East, which is going to give them fewer point opportunities than a bad team in the East. Well, even though the top teams in the East, I think, are still better.
My wooden spoon is Minnesota because I think that's enough, right? Minnesota wooden spoon because you Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup, Duane. I'll start with the U.S. Open Cup. We used to have one team that took this championship so importantly, and every year we're the winners. And they've been really good in Major League Soccer. We both feel they'll have a little drop-off this year, and maybe the U.S. Open Cup will be their saving grace of their season. Seattle Sounders, once again, for the 5th time, winner of the U.S. Open Cup.
Yeah, look, and there are teams that do take this competition more seriously than others, for sure. I have a feeling that RSL might get it done this year, so I'll go with them. I believe that's actually who I picked last year as well, and they've never really gone deep in this, but that's part of the reason. But I'm going to go a bit outside the box here and pick RSL to win the U.S. Open Cup. Or maybe if I could put like a second pick in, which is cheating a little bit, maybe Atlanta. Maybe Atlanta puts
Toronto?
that would be my...
Come on, Toronto. We all know Toronto's an American city. No? Okay, that doesn't work. Supporter Shield. All right, I'll start. I'm going with Montreal. Of course not. Come on, we all know Toronto's going to win the Supporter Shield again. Win everything again.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be cute, but I can't. The only other team I give a chance to is NYCFC here. I think that they'll push them a little bit, but I do think Toronto. And the question, I think, is more whether they'll break 69 points. I don't think they will. I think they'll win the Supporters Shield with 65 is my prediction this year.
Okay, yeah. An MLS Cup finalist. I'll start. My finalist will be Kansas City because at one point I'll be right.
Okay. And you're picking TFC to win?
TFC to win Major League Soccer. Again, to win everything. To win the treble. Such a cop-out. Feels like I wear a cop-out, but everyone is literally choosing TFC because if you have eyesight and if you're able to put things down on paper, you realize that Toronto's ahead above everybody else. And Toronto's, even if they had a not as successful season, they'll still win everything. Toronto versus Kansas City in Toronto for the 3rd season in a row MLS Cup. And Toronto will beat Kansas City at home to repeat and to win effing everything again.
There are only two teams in MLS that are head and tails above everyone else. That doesn't mean there's only two teams that can win because the Cup final is a one-game game, right? So the Western champion can win the championship for sure. But you'd be silly to pick anyone other than TFC to win it. My finalist, I'm going to go a little bit outside the chalk and go with RSL. To get back to a championship game. I just sort of like the way that they're building that team and they have had past success in playoffs. They know there's culture around that, which makes them successful and allows them to have gotten to 2 finals, and I could see them getting back to another one. So I will pick, to be a ratings disaster in the United States final with Salt Lake City versus a Canadian city and ESPN or 5 days at Fox next year. I think it's Fox next year, just shaking their head.
Yeah, but like, why? Not Toronto again? Jeez. Thanks for listening.
At this point in time.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for listening to our annual prediction show. Save this show, download it, put it in a folder where you can go and listen to it in 10 months' time. Because last year, well, we were right. And if you have an old $2 laying around, just put it on TFC. You'll make $3 at the end of the season. Yay! That's a big, big bet.
You won't even make $3 on a $2 bet. You'd make $2.10. But at any rate.
Exactly. You can listen to us live Monday to Friday at 10 a.m. on youtube.com/sports podcasting network. And your support is greatly appreciated on patreon.com/sports podcasting network. It's because of listeners like Steve, like Chris, like Dino, like Don, like Jack, like Chris. There's 30 great human beings supporting us, and you can be part of that too. $1 a month is enough to give us what we need to motivate us and give you what you need which is independent soccer journalism. And to continue to have so, to continue to be one of the ones left standing, we do need your contribution, your pledge. We're starting next, at the end of the month in March, beginning of April, we'll have our first new show, a return of an old show, but for Patreons only. You love Canadian soccer, you know what's going on in the Canadian soccer landscape in the next 12 months, and you want to hear all about it. It's going to be for Patreons only. Go to patreon.com/sportspodcast network right now. $1 a month will give you access to the brand new show later in March. And as always, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee. You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute, myself at Kev Laramee, and the show at Soccer Today SPN. As always, until Monday for the wrap-up of weekend number 1 in Major League Soccer. And for our French listeners, Sunday, Sur la Transversale is back. Montreal Impact post-game show. But until then, have a great season and a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.